I wanted to talk about new head coaches, which ones are walking into really, really good immediate situations and which ones have their work cut out for them. This is not a 5-year exploratory exercise where I predict how they'll be in 2029. We're talking about 2024. Kalen DeBoer walked into a really good situation at Alabama. Now, that depends on your viewpoint. You could have the viewpoint that no one wants to follow a legend, and you're right, most don't. The guy that's wired properly does, as long as when that legend walked out, he did not salt the earth in the process. Nick Saban didn't. Trust me, he didn't. They still got a top 10 talent roster there, top 5 talent roster there. Place is immaculate. Every resource you would need to win is at Alabama. And I'm going to go a step further. Now, this is a theory of mine that we're going to have to test. I actually believe Nick Saban being at Alabama meant they did not have to realize their ultimate potential in terms of resource and giving because Nick Saban was there. And so you got the discount treatment on a lot of things. You got benefit of the doubt on a lot of things. And as a result, I think there's untapped potential in the resource pool at Alabama. Now, that's a theory of mine that we're going to see tested. But you got an A-list head coach there. It is, I think, a top 15 staff that this time next year will be a top 5 national staff. And there is a lot of talent still to work with. Very first world problems Alabama has. And keep in mind, it's about to be April. Portal's about to open up. I think they'll be on the receiving end a whole lot more than the departing end. Brent Brennan, a name that garnered far less headlines than Kalen DeBoer when he came to Alabama. Brent Brennan was at San Jose State. I don't think he ever had more than 7 wins at San Jose State. He went to Arizona. Why are we talking about him? Well, it's because they kept their elite talent. They got a quarterback and a wide receiver out there, each who will garner first-round NFL draft consideration this time a year from now. And they stayed. And everyone, me included, thought they'd probably go off to Washington with Jed Fish. They stayed. They are 19th with those guys in preseason S&P Plus, and they are a top 50 team in returning production. And Arizona, as you know, is joining the Big 12, along with Arizona State, along with Colorado, along with Utah. Kind of a sneaky team out there. You see the odds from FanDuel if you're watching on YouTube right now. You see the odds there on the side of your screen to win. You see the over-unders. Really sneaky team because that's a good coaching staff, and it's an underrated coaching staff, very overlooked. Keep an eye on them. Mike Elko at Texas A&M, I think absolutely belongs on the positive end of this conversation. Here's why I love Elko immediately at Texas A&M. Firstly, he also inherits a top 20 caliber coaching, or he inherits a top 20 roster. He gets Texas A&M, which I'll get back to in just a second. He's got a quarterback with a 5-star ceiling in Connor Wigman. I think there's all the positives with very few of the negatives because he gets all the positives of infinite resources on his own. He gets a really good talent roster. And normally, like Kalen DeBoer walks in, sky-high expectations, last dude won half a dozen national championships. The role Elko is inheriting was filled with a guy who frankly underachieved. And that was Jimbo Fisher. So you got all the toys you need to play with, and the previous guy didn't get it done. And so now you got a guy who, instead of coaching at A&M, actually gets A&M, and he's immersed himself in A&M. He knows he was there before. He knows which I's need to be dotted, which T's need to be crossed. So I love his entry point there. Now, as for Jed Fish, we just talked about Arizona a second ago. Well, Jed Fish left Arizona. He went to Washington. I'm not sure immediately in 2024, I'm crazy about the prospect of what Washington could be under Jed Fish. Now, 2025, you come back and talk to him, it may sound a lot different. They lost, as you guys well know, all of the starting offense. They lost 20 of 22 starters overall. They're 130th in returning production. Did they add some kids from the portal? Of course they did. They're also joining the Big Ten this year. So let's talk goals. If you're talking about competing for the Big Ten, I don't think they'll do that. If you're trying to make a bowl game, I don't think that's the conversation Washington fans are having, actually. You just played in a national championship a few months ago. So offense is entirely new. Everything's entirely new. Have realistic expectations for them this year. I'm not saying they're falling off a cliff record-wise like TCU did after they played in the title game, but it won't be the easiest thing in the world this year for Jed Fish. Down the coast a little ways at UCLA, Deshaun Foster takes over for Chip Kelly. I'm not quite sure I'm feeling the vibe there in 2024 either. They're 91st in returning production, and USC snatched their coordinator defensively across town. So there's also this kind of weird, nebulous, like, what are we? What's our identity? What is UCLA's place in the Big Ten? Because they joined that conference too. And what's the energy, I guess? Like, how motivated are the power players, the deep-pocketed people around the program? You know, the ones who famously apparently couldn't stand Chip Kelly. How motivated are they now? And Jonathan Smith. Now, we were talking about this as a staff. I don't know if I fully believe in putting Jonathan Smith on this list. He's at Michigan State now. He brought over Aiden Childs, who was a former high four-star quarterback, and he was with him at Oregon State last year, and he comes to Michigan State. I think it may have taken that staff a little while, and is still taking them a little while, to fully get their hands around the portal and how to properly construct an NIL machine and strategy. And that's not an overnight thing, but I think they're committed to doing it. And Michigan State has way more money than most of America realizes they have. But their over-under win total is 5.5. And I think there's probably more than a year's worth of rebuild that has to go on there. The reason that I'm hesitant is because I've seen Jonathan Smith with an undermanned roster before, beating teams he has no business beating. And he was probably not as good at quarterback with those teams as he potentially could be with Childs. So I put him on the list. We'll see. There's the B-roll. If you're listening on podcast, I grew up in the South, so every introductory piece of B-roll that you see of a coach, he's walking around and it's sunny, maybe a jacket on because it's normally January. Jonathan Smith walks out in Spartan Stadium, there's like half a foot of snow. Hey, Coach, welcome in. Then again, we were at an Oregon State game last year and the weather was abysmal, so he's probably used to it.